Wright and the mayor and our Keepers of the Dream. They all got a copy of the run of the show, and I'm just going to get started. Good evening. My name is Frank Williams. I'm director of the White Plains Youth Bureau, and we're so very happy to have all of you to join us on this most important evening as we begin to celebrate the life of Dr. King. We have a lot of challenges in our country, and we have someone who has lived through the ups and downs, the hills and valleys of civil rights and social justice, Dr. Flonzie Wright. Dr. Flonzie Wright Brown Wright. She's going to be talking about her story and her work over the many, many years of trying to make a difference in our community. This effort is a program brought to you by Keepers of the Dream, and we're going to introduce them, our young people, and have them say a few words. But before we do, I am so very honored and happy to present our mayor, Mayor Thomas Roach, and then after Mayor Roach, our Youth Board Chair, Justin Brash. They will say a few words about this evening, about the importance of our young people holding on to their history. Mayor Roach. Mayor Roach.
You're muted, Mayor.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that.
Mayor. There we are.
I had the run of show in front of me, so and then when I was part of the show, I couldn't get to my unmute button. But it's my pleasure to be here tonight. I think this is a great opportunity to hear from Dr. Wright. I'm really looking forward to that. You know, when we look back on the time, the civil rights movement and the sacrifices made by so many, putting their lives on the line to achieve the rights that we are all entitled to, the basic rights we're entitled to, it stands in stark contrast to the violence, sedition, and insurrection that recently took place in Washington because some people didn't like the outcome of the election and therefore felt they had the right to overturn it. So it's a great opportunity to hear from Dr. Wright about the work that was done then and the nonviolent way in which it was done. And I think it's a reminder to all of us that what was sacrificed by so many at that time, including Dr. King, gave his life. We all are obligated to carry that on. This is a democracy, and in a democracy, we are all responsible for carrying that chalice and making sure that we continue to move in the right direction. In my opinion, we've had some tough years recently, but I think the sun is coming out in about a week, and we'll all be able to get to work to make things better again. Instead of just trying to hold on to what we've gained, we can get back to work on making this country better and making it what it should be, and honoring the memory of Dr. King and the service of people like Dr. Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for those really great words, and you're right. We're trying to maintain the legacy and improve the legacy, in fact. At this time, I'm going to have my Youth Board Chair, Justin Brash, to say a few words. Justin?
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm quite excited to hear Dr. Wright myself. I've certainly heard of her and her work in Mississippi, registering voters, and I believe she was the first elected official, African-American or Black elected official in post-Reconstruction Mississippi. So she's really an inspiring figure and someone who's going to inspire us and show us all, as Mayor Roach said, how we have our responsibility to get involved and to make the world a better place. I'm very fortunate to be a city councilman in White Plains, to work with the Youth Bureau and to be the chair of the Youth Bureau. And I just want to take this opportunity, instead of talking about Dr. King, to thank our leaders, people like Bhavna and Frank Williams, for all they do. They work day and night, and the Youth Bureau works day and night for all the people in our community, whether they're grandpas being brought together with our youth. It doesn't matter. We have 68 programs, and what makes White Plains an amazing place, under the leadership of Mayor Tom Roach and others, is if you can't afford our Youth Bureau programs, they're free. We're about building a better society, a stronger society, and a society where people are all treated equally and fairly, no matter where you come from. We want to give you opportunity. And I'm sure we're going to hear how Dr. Wright struggled to bring opportunity to so many, and I know we're all excited about that. So I'm looking forward to this, and You should all know that I'm accessible and available if I can ever help any of you, either through the Youth Bureau or the City Council. Good evening, and I'm really looking forward to this, Dr. Wright.
Thank you, Justin. We appreciate those remarks, and we all do work hard, and thank you for your leadership. So this program, the Keepers of the Dream, we have this connection relationship with our young people, but we also have youth advisors, and these are the adults who work hard to make sure that our young people have voice and have information and cultivating leadership. And so I just want to acknowledge our youth advisors, and they are Danny Bernstein from Backyard Sports, Fred Goldberg, who is a part of the Youth Bureau family and also active in New Rochelle with the New Rochelle Youth Bureau. Howard Roston. Howard is active with the Youth Alliance and has a program tomorrow evening with Brian Stevenson. Daniel Goldberg. Daniel is active with the school system here in the county. And Wayne Francis, who is the pastor of the Life Church. So at this time, I'm going to turn the program over to three of our youth leaders who are going to facilitate the program. We're going to say a little bit about Keepers of the Dream, and then they're going to introduce or present Dr. Flonzie Brown Wright. And they are Michael Wexman, Deida Polanco, and Sam Scafada. All right, guys, take it and run with it.
Thanks, Frank. Hey, everyone. My name is Michael, and I'm a senior at Scarsville High School. I've been a member of Keepers of the Dream for about a year, but Keepers of the Dream started 5 years ago when those youth advisors that Frank just mentioned came together and made this group. They were inspired by Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And the group's been around for 5 years, and it's basically a place for high schoolers from across the county to come together and to talk, to get to know each other. And I remember I was hooked right after my first meeting, and it's really turned into a safe space for me and many of my peers to talk about how we view the world and our place in it. So now we're meeting virtually. I'm gonna pass it over to Sam to talk about how we're running it now.
Yeah, thanks. So we thought that when we were looking to create this community of people who really care about social justice, that we had to have a strong internet community. Despite us being virtual, we still wanted to connect. And so today, Keepers of the Dream consists of bi-weekly meetings on specific issues about politics and specifically social justice. It's entirely run by the members. They are the ones who get to decide what we talk about. And I'm really proud of how passionate of a community that we've created, because we often find ourselves starting on one topic and then branching out into a totally different topic, or shooting right past our when our meetings are supposed to end because the members are just so passionate. And we're really fortunate to be able to change it up a little bit this week with a guest like Flonzie Brown Wright. So we're so happy you're here. And I'm going to pass it off to Zaida to officially introduce you.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everyone. I'm Zaida. I'm another one of the head organizers of Keepers of the Dream. Today, we have a very special guest with us. As the first African-American female elected to public office in a multiracial Mississippi town, this civil rights activist and post-Reconstruction legislator has helped register thousands of voters in Mississippi, working directly with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many other humanitarian activists, both locally and nationally. Not only is she the best-selling author of Looking Back to Move Ahead, which chronicles her incredible journey growing up in a small Mississippi town through her work in the civil rights movement, but her experiences are also documented in a 1997 film entitled Standing on My Sister's Shoulders. To this day, her efforts during the movement have given a voice to a multitude of people of color and women seeking equality. And now, please join me in the welcoming of Dr. Flonzie Brown Wright.
Thank you so very much. I do appreciate certainly the opportunity to share this evening with you. It's a great pleasure for me to share from a firsthand perspective many of my experiences, not only with Dr. King, but working in Mississippi and throughout the nation, actually, because I've had national responsibilities as well as international. But before I begin my talk, I just want to let you know, you may not know this about your executive director. I watched this young man grow up as a young kid in our hometown of Canton. His father was one of the first African-American men to run for a public office in Mississippi after we got the right to vote. Even though he was not successful, he will go down in history as being Frank Williams Sr., who stepped out and ran for a political office when it was very, very, very dangerous. I want to also let you know that his mother, Mrs. Jewel Williams, is one of my soul sisters and is also the first African-American female to win a position as alderwoman in our town. How many of you knew that? You didn't know that, did you? Because he's not the one who would tell you that. But certainly he comes from a strong family. And of course, he learned by example. And so it's really an honor for me to see him in charge of such a prestigious organization that has at its heart the success of young people. I want to certainly thank the mayor for coming out and sharing with us this evening, as well as the alderman for your city. And just to kind of tell you what I'm going to talk about this evening, I want you to keep this thought in mind. Every generation has an assignment. I want to repeat that. Every generation has an assignment. And just as Dr. King and others, but being a historian, I want to just go back a little bit in history and talk about it. I know you know all this, so I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I have to remind you of the importance and the impact that these old soldiers made. And I'm sure you know Harriet Tubman, the Underground Railroad, she had an assignment. Frederick Douglass, telling through his newspaper the plight of Black people, had an assignment. Sojourner Truth, and I'm a student of Sojourner Truth. I feel as though she was my auntie because I've read her work, I know her work. Many of you may or may not know that Sojourner Truth was the first African-American female to file a lawsuit against her plantation owner and win it. This was in the 1800s. And the reason was the plantation owner had her 17-year-old son, Peter, on his plantation. And the only time that she could go and visit him was when she was allowed. So as you young people become parents, you cannot even fathom that you would have to get permission to walk down the road to see your child. But when she filed that lawsuit and won it and became not only the Ain't I a Woman phenomenon, but the person who actually filed a lawsuit against her master and won it. So I want you to keep in mind all evening, we're talking about every generation has an assignment. So as we traverse through the Sojourner Truths, the Harriet Tubmans, to the Fannie Lou Hamers, the Annie Devines, the Flonzie Brown Wrights, the Merle Evers, the L.C. Joyces, the June Johnsons. These are names that you young people need to know, look up and do some work to know who they are and how they have impacted our society for years and years and years. I became involved. I didn't choose the civil rights movement. This was nothing that I would have chosen to do. And I wasn't going to get my head beat. I wasn't going to get myself killed to be in a march, not me. But you know, you don't get a chance to choose your life's work. Many times you are assigned work from somebody else. So I was assigned this by Mrs. Annie Devine, one of the three women who presented the challenge in 1964 to the Democratic Party to have the Mississippi delegation seated. Mrs. Devine was from my hometown. So in a meeting, she came up to me and she said, "Flonzie, you're going to run for office." I said, "Mrs. Devine, no ma'am, not me. I don't know anything about running for office. You know, I characterize myself even today, and I'm going on 79 years old. I characterize myself as a foot soldier. I love working behind the scenes, training people, and then getting them to do the work. But Mrs. Devine persuaded me to run for the position of election commissioner. Now, voter suppression has just not now come into being. In 1968, when I decided to run for public office, and by the way, I'm the first African-American female to be elected in Mississippi post or pre-Reconstruction. pre-Reconstruction, women couldn't vote. And so when Mrs. Devine told me that I was going to run for office, and I presented my petition to run for office, I was advised that I would have to run in all 5 beats of our county, whereas my predecessor, a white male, only had to run in 1 beat, the beat that he was going to be serving. And so being the first Black woman out there in the trenches and knocking on doors, getting people registered to vote, and trying to collaborate with people to allow them to understand the importance of their being so that they could make the kinds of changes that needed to be made. And so now we come to 1966, and I'm sure you know this. If you haven't, read my book. James Meredith began a one-man's walk against fear. And it began in Memphis, and he was going to walk by himself, didn't want any news media, didn't want a crowd, didn't want any company. He was going to walk from Memphis to Jackson for 2 purposes: to show America that a Black man could walk down a Mississippi highway with any harm befalling him, number 1. Number 2, he was going to visit many of those Mississippi Delta counties to help people get registered to vote. Because even after the Voting Rights Act was passed, there were so many obstructions that we had to work our way through just to get the right to vote. 2 days into his 2nd day in Hernando, Mississippi, just 18 miles south of Memphis, Mr. Meredith was shot in the shoulder. And when he was shot, the organizations from around the country, SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SNCC, Student Non-Violating Committee, the NAACP, the Voter Education Project that John Lewis organized, CORE, COFO, all of the organizations came together because they simply could not allow Mr. Meredith's work to be in vain. They decided that they would all assemble in Hernando and continue the march. It was a walk, not a march, to continue the walk/march that Mr. Meredith had begun, which was the right thing to do. So for days and days, Dr. King and others, now let me just mention this to you. Dr. King did not want this position. Dr. King did not want to be heralded as a leader. Why? Because Dr. King was born on the other side of the tracks. And since y'all are not Southerners, let me tell you, one side of the tracks is where white affluent people live. The other side of the tracks is where Black people, underprivileged people, resided. So Dr. King really did not want the title of being a leader because he did not feel as though his people, he did not feel as though we would accept him because he was born into an affluent family. So, however, Dr. King was chosen as the leader of the march. So as they walked all the way through some 200 miles of Delta County areas, stopping, spending a day or 2, getting people registered, moving on, and that march began to gain such momentum that it began with, I'm going to say, 35 people. Then as they went through those Delta towns, many people walked off their jobs, walked off those jobs at those plantations to join this march because they knew it was right. And knowing that when they got back to their hometown, they would have no jobs. They may have been put out of their homes, but they were willing to pay that price so that you all could have the opportunities that you're having today. And I love your mission, providing children the tools to become good citizens. And that's what you must do, keeping in mind every generation has an assignment. So 3 days before the marchers reached our hometown of Canton, Mississippi, which is 20 miles north of Jackson, my telephone rang. Now, we didn't have caller ID. I had no idea who was on the phone. So I picked up the phone and of course I said, hello. And the voice on the other end of the phone said, is this Flonzie Goodlow? I was Goodlow at that time. I recognized his voice immediately. And I said, yes, it is. He said, this is Martin King. I said, yes, Dr. King, how can I help you? He said, well, I've been told that if I wanted to get something done in Canton, I needed to call you. Because remember, I'm a foot soldier. I didn't consider myself a leader as other folk did. I said, how can I help you? He said, well, can you provide housing and food for 3,000 people without giving it a thought. I told him, yes, I can. Now, when I hung up the phone, I have to admit that I got very nervous. I said, how in the world am I going to pull this off? I told Dr. King I can do this. But I really didn't have any fear because our community was so cohesive. It was so united. I knew that I could call people and ask them to let people sleep in their homes, to fix an extra pot of greens, to fix an extra pan of cornbread, because I knew that we had to feed those tired, hungry marchers because they were going to spend 2 to 3 days in Canton because Canton, Madison County had a 70% African-American population with the potential of about 10,000 people to be registered, but only 110 were because we were all afraid because we would get cussed out. The sheriff's office was right across the street. We may have gotten beaten. Many people did get beat just trying to get the right to vote. So he said, well, we'll be in Canton in 3 days. And so in that 3-day period, I was able to rouse all of the persons who own restaurants, called many people across the city to prepare food. I called the Catholic school and talked to the priest, Father Luke Mitchell, and asked him if they could house people. The idea was that the men were going to sleep under a tent in Canton on the school grounds, and the women were going to stay in homes. Well, when the marchers came, we were able to house and feed them as I had promised. And then we began to meet. We began to talk about the strategy, what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And let me tell you something. Sitting at the feet of Dr. King and hearing him talk about the kinds of plans that we needed to put in place, because one of their concerns were all the national leaders, James Farmer, Stokely Carmichael, Willie Ricks, all of the national leaders had converged in Canton. But his concern was what was going to happen to these local people once we left. And so he was concerned that nothing went awry for those of us who were left behind. So as we began to meet and strategize, meeting in the home of a senior couple, the Washingtons, we began to talk about the march to the courthouse, what we were going to do on that evening. We had gotten a permit from the city of Canton to conduct a march from the Freedom House up to the courthouse. We had got a permit to do that. We had not gotten a permit to erect a tent that would sleep several hundred of people. So in that meeting, we talked about the march. And if you look at the cover of my book, I'm introducing Dr. King. You see that lady right there? I'm introducing Dr. King on the same courthouse steps that many Black people had been ran out of just trying to register and vote. So we did conduct a voter registration campaign while Dr. King was there. We conducted meetings while he was there. And then we marched to the courthouse where he spoke to, by that time, some 15,000 people in the courthouse yard of Canton, Madison County. And then we came back. And we met again on what we were going to do the evening after the march. As I mentioned, we had got a permit to hold the march, but not to erect the tent. The tent was rolled up on the side of the school ground, McNeil Elementary School. Stokely Carmichael was speaking, as other national leaders have spoken. And so he began to say, we're going to pitch the tent. How many of you have heard the term Black Power? How many of you have heard the term Black Power? Okay. Black Power was first used in the small town up in the Delta by Willie Ricks, not Stokely Carmichael. But the term Black Power was entrenched in my hometown of Canton. When Stokely Carmichael was speaking, he was saying that we're going to pitch the tent. And then we began chanting, we're going to pitch the tent. We're going to pitch the tent. We're going to pitch the tent. And then Stokely said, because look at all of that Black power that's out there. And of course, the men jumped from this makeshift stage, started toward the tent to unroll the tent. And then that's when the tear gas canisters came. There were highway patrolmen on the top of the school building that fired down on us. We were encircled by a group of highway patrolmen, and we were tear gassed. We were trampled over, just as we witnessed some of what happened in Washington this past Wednesday. And so many were hauled off to jail. Many folk were hurt. I was hurt. I got a bruised arm and scratches on my arm, on my face, a sprained ankle. Many folk. And then those that were taken to the hospital, the Blacks who were taken to the hospital, the white physicians would not wait on them because they were Black. But just so happened, there were 3 Black doctors in the crowd who brought their bags with them to help bind up the wounds of some of the people who had been injured. So after that night, that's when we were all tear gassed. Then the next day, we met again. And then Dr. King gave us a moving command. He gave us a moving charge, as I want to give to you all tonight. This was his charge. He said to us, I'm not going to be with you very long. My days are numbered. I'm going to die a violent death. My days are not long on this earth. He said, but what I want you to do, and there were 12 of us local people there. He said, what I want the 12 of you to do when I'm gone, not if I'm gone, but when I'm gone, I want the 12 of you to make me a vow that whenever you see racism, when you see segregation, when you see separatism, when you see hatred, that you would stand up and you would call it out. That night in June of 1966, even though I had been involved for years before then, but that night, the resolve that had been in my soul emerged, and I raised my hand and I said, I will be one of those, Dr. King. So while you may think that I'm with you tonight because of the invitation extended by Dr. Frank Williams Jr., and I am, but let me tell you why I'm really here. I'm with you tonight because I made a vow, because I understood that every generation has its assignment. I made a vow that whenever I had the opportunity to speak to people, to teach people, to talk about the things that happened on whatever level was presented to me, that I would do that. So that's why I'm with you tonight. You know, I'm going on 79 years old. I'm old and I'm tired, but I would not dare allow this opportunity to pass by without me saying something that I hope would encourage some of you. And so for years, for almost 58 years, I've been on this journey trying to teach people and tell people about the movement from a firsthand perspective and to encourage them to stay in this struggle. Coincidentally, when Ronald Reagan signed the national holiday for Dr. King on November the 2nd in 1983, I was on a detail in Washington, and coincidentally, Mrs. Coretta King and I were on the same plane. We knew each other because I had introduced her on several occasions. And so when I boarded the plane, she was, of course, in first class. She and her children were in first class. And of course, I was with the government. So, you know, I had to fly second class or third class. But anyway, second class. So I passed by her. We embraced, we hugged, we chatted for a minute, and I took my seat. About 10 minutes later, the flight attendant came and got me. She said, Mrs. King wants you to come and sit with her. I had never flown first class before. So she said, she wants you to come and sit beside her. And I did. And while sitting beside her, she gave me this postcard. She gave me this postcard because they had just opened the King Center in Atlanta. And she autographed this postcard to my children. And of course, this is her signature. And so I have kept up with them, and we've had her when I lived in Dayton. We had her in Dayton on the day that we named one of the main streets in Dayton for Dr. King. I've had an opportunity to be in her company on several occasions. And I make a tribute to her for keeping her husband's dream alive. Dr. King, though he was a man short in stature, he stood about 5'6" and no more than 5'7". He was a giant of a soldier. While they were in Canton, I had the opportunity to drive him around various places in Canton to show him the Head Start centers, the various churches that were active, and introduce him to different people. And then he said to me, he said, Flonzie, you know, I want some soul food, because we had provided enough bologna sandwiches and hot dogs and cheeseburgers and French fries. He said, I want some soul food. And I called my mother and I said, Mom, can you prepare a meal for 6 people? That was Dr. King and his entourage. She said, give me an hour. And so in 1 hour, I took Dr. King and his entourage to my mom's house where she fed them. I saved those dishes for over 50 years that he ate out of. And 2 years ago, I donated those dishes to the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in honor of my mother. So there's a lot of history that I have lived during my 7 to 8 plus years. So now at this time, I'll take some questions, because you know my mind runs real fast. So I probably ran over some things that you may not have gotten initially. I'll be delighted to answer whatever questions or whatever comments you may have to pose to me. Are you still there?
So yeah, so Michael, Zeta, Sam, you got to facilitate this. This is your program. So
Sure. Yeah. So if anyone has a question, you could just either raise your hand physically or put it in the chat, or we're not putting in the chat. You could do the participants raise the hand feature, and then we'll call on you, and you could say it out loud.
Just
Raj,
unmute yourself first.
Raj, do you have a question?
Yeah. First off, I just wanted to thank Dr. Wright for coming here today. Your story is truly inspiring, and to those who organized it. So my question is, what is the best way to unite a community in which unity and inclusivity isn't a priority?
Well, you have to build it one brick at a time, one person at a time. I'm often asked that question because many times young people are frustrated that we are where we are. Many of them feel as though we should be farther ahead than we are, and we should be. But let me give you my take on why we're not. I just wrote a piece today for the paper, and I addressed something along those lines. Understanding that our people came to this country against their will, in chains, with no rights, with no power, being considered chattel, being considered property, to where we are today with the right to vote, with being able to elect people. The challenge is, how can you stay encouraged during these times? And let me share this with you, what I wrote in this piece today. And it's called, I'll think about it in a minute. But we can't get discouraged because of where we are today versus where we think we ought to be. Because the struggle for Black people, and that's why it's so significant when people say she is the first, he is the first, because after all, our ancestors built the White House. Our ancestors worked for day labor for $2 a day. And so to come from $2 a day to $200,000 a year for some people, that is certainly a success. And so we can't get discouraged when things don't happen as quickly as we think they should because Again, every generation has an assignment.
Thank you, Dr. Wright.
Did that answer your question?
It did. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I have a question.
Your name, please?
My name is Kennedy Cato. I am representing the NAACP, the White Plains Greenberg NAACP.
Okay.
I wanted to thank you for coming on tonight. I found your message truly inspiring. And I wanted to ask, what were the struggles or difficulties in becoming the first African American, as well as the first African American woman as an elected commissioner in Mississippi?
Well, it was very difficult. I received many death threats. I've been to jail. I've been shot at. I've been tear gassed. I've had my life threatened. I've had the lives of my children threatened. My dad was a self-employed electrician. He had work taken from him because I was involved in the movement. So I've been through all of that. On any given day, I would walk out of my house and there would be 3 or 4 truckloads of Klansmen sitting in front of my door, brandishing their rifles in order to frighten me. In my book, and I'm an NACPer as well, after Medgar died and his brother Charles came to take up the mantle and hired me to open up the Canton branch of the NACP office, on any given day, I would come to work and the Klan, I want you to read this book, the Klan would have left a calling card for me. Can y'all see this? Can y'all see this?
Yes, ma'am. We can't read the words, but we can see the card.
It says the eyes of the Klan are upon you. And so on any given day, I would come to work for the NAACP, and there would be truckloads of Klansmen sitting in front of the NACP office door with their guns to try and frighten me. And there were times I was very afraid because I didn't want to be a martyr. I didn't want my children killed. I didn't want to be killed for my children. And so one day, when the lives of my children were threatened, I went to the local sheriff and I had a gun. Don't y'all do this now. Don't y'all do this. Don't y'all do this. But I had a gun. My brother was a Vietnam veteran and he had given me a little lemon squeezer. That's a little gun. And I went to the sheriff's office. And I don't know whether I was crazy or bold or mad. I'm not sure. But I went to his office and I laid my gun up on the counter. And I told the sheriff this. I said, if you know who's threatening the lives of my children, you better call your boys off. Because if they come to 344 Boyd Street, I'm going to leave them in the window. And I meant that. I said, I chose to be in the movement. I said, y'all know me. Y'all know who I am. My children did not choose to do that. But if anybody comes to my home to bother my children, you better send a body bag because I'm going to put them in it. Now, what I would do, I never wanted my kids to know that. What it required that I do is that when they got out of school every day, I would allow them to get a little head start walking with their classmates. And then I would leave my job and I would drive on another street to follow them home to be sure that they got home safely. I did not tell them that until 10 years ago. Now my daughter at the time was 10. And on this Thursday, she'll be 62. So I never told them that until just a few years before my oldest son died, because I didn't want them always looking around. I didn't want them to have any preconceived notion that white folk are bad. I just simply had to protect them. But it required that I go over and above what would ordinarily be required for the safety of my children. But yes, I was afraid. But then I had always been taught by my parents, God bless their souls, that if you believe in something, you stand up for it. If nobody's standing but you stand up for what is right. I did it, not because it was a popular thing to do. I did it, not because somebody thought it was a nice thing to give the colors their right to vote. I did it because it was the right thing to do.
Sam?
Hello, I have a question.
Okay?
Hi, my name is Brooke Taylor. I'm with the White Plains chapter of NAACP.
Very good.
And my question is, other than meeting Dr. King, what is the highlight of your work in the civil rights movement?
My highlight of the civil rights movement, well, there are many, but this stands out, is when I was given the opportunity to come to Washington to testify before the subcommittee on why they needed to send voter registration examiners into Mississippi. And I'm reminded of that at this time because I'm thinking of those security guards at the Capitol, one who was killed, because when you come into those buildings, you are ushered in an underground tunnel until you get to where you're supposed to go, but you have to present ID, you have to be vetted, you have to be all of that. But when I had the opportunity to speak before the subcommittee as to why elections would not be fair against Blacks, that they needed to send federal examiners to do away with this 21-item questionnaire. You see, you young folk cannot fathom that back in the day, back in my day, when you went to register to vote, it's in the book, I want y'all to read it. It's in the book on page 68. When Blacks went to register, we had to interpret a 21-item, 2-page questionnaire. Questions such as, are you a communist? How many feathers are on a chicken? How many jelly beans are in a pound of candy? How many bubbles are in a bar of soap? How many polka dots are in a yard of fabric? Whatever the registrar wanted to dream up, you had to answer those questions. So when I went to register, I didn't go with the crowd. I didn't take the marchers. I went alone because I felt that my chances for being registered would be better if I were alone. So when I went in to register, I got the 2-page, 21-item questionnaire. And when you got to item number 17, you had to go reach in a cigar box on his desk and pull out a section of the Mississippi Constitution that he had written and folded in small slivers of paper. I pulled out what is habeas corpus. Now, y'all you have to know that we were not taught that kind of history in Mississippi schools. I had no idea what that meant. But since I am a former college professor, I knew that I had to write something because I took the chance that if he was having a good day, that maybe he may not have known what it meant either, and that he would have passed me. Because let me tell you, writing your name in the big voter registration book was the highlight of it was the apex of one's career politically if you were able to register and vote. So when I finished my questionnaire, I gave it to him. I looked him toe to toe, eyeball to eyeball, and he was very mean. He was very mean. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, well, how did I do? I just knew I had aced it. I said, well, how did I do? And very mean, very angrily, he said, you didn't pass. So I said, well, what was my mistake? And I thought that if he was having a good day, he would tell me what my mistake was. But I also knew not to get too loud because just across the hall was the sheriff who had beaten people, put people in jail, had killed people. So I knew not to get too loud and engage in a back and forth with him. I said, well, what was my mistake? And I'm going to use this word, and I want you to understand the context in which I'm using it. He said, nigger, I told you you didn't pass. Get the hell out of my office. And that's when I decided, along with Mrs. Devine, that I was going to run for public office. And when I walked down the corridor, how many of you saw A Time to Kill? Did you see the movie A Time to Kill with Samuel Jackson? But anyway, I walked down the Madison County Courthouse and I resolved within myself, and this is not good English, but this is what I said. I'm gonna get your job. I'm gonna get your job. So when election time came, I didn't run for his position. I ran for the position that supervised his office, and I won it. The gentleman that I beat had been in office, they tell me, for about 40 years. But here this little Black woman had the nerve, the audacity to believe that she could gain more votes than someone who had been in the system for many, many years. And so being the first African-American female to set up elections, to train poll workers, to teach them how to use the voting machine. Now, voting machines were not in use until just one second. Hello?
Hey, this is Chris from Bacon Home Chef. How you doing today?
Okay, I'm on a long distance Zoom call. Call me back in about 30 minutes.
Okay,
Thank you. I'm sorry, I've been having a washing machine trouble. So that's the guy letting me know he got my part. But he got to call me back, right? So, and so I was able to unseat him, but it wasn't without voter suppression. As I mentioned, heretofore, when a person ran, Madison County had 5 beats. When a person ran for political office, they only had to run within their respective beat. When it was announced in the newspaper, and that article is in the book, y'all read it. When it was announced that a Black woman a colored woman had qualified to run, they changed the rules and required that I run in all 5 beats of the county. And then I still beat them all. So that's just part of the election journey. And that's why it is so important, young people, that you understand you have an assignment. You have an assignment in addition to keeping the dream, in addition to celebrating, in addition to going to school. You have an assignment. You cannot rest until there's a cure for AIDS. You cannot rest until every elderly person has health care. You cannot rest until those babies are out of those cages. You cannot rest until the injustice that you can solve has been solved. You're not just in a program because it's nice. You're not in a program because my junior mentor is the executive director, of which I'm very proud. You don't just come to just meet and hang out and chill. You have an assignment. You have got to leave America and White Plains and your surrounding communities better than when you found it. When I was on staff at Miami University, I coined a phrase, and it's been used all over the country, they tell me. It simply says, if your space is no better when you leave it than when you found it, you need to redefine your journey. So if in your life, as you matriculate through your educational journey, if you cannot make someone else's life better, if you cannot intentionally make somebody else's life better, you're on the wrong journey. Re-examine your journey because you have an assignment. And your assignment is that when you see wrong, organize. And it doesn't take 10, 15, 20, 30 people. Dr. King was only one person. Rosa Parks was only one person. Fannie Lou Hamer was only one person. It starts with one, but you got to work hard and diligently to be sure that your dream, the dream that you're keeping, is kept the way it ought to be kept. Okay?
Sam, you have a question?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. This is really an incredible experience. I wanted to ask about your reaction to the recent Georgia elections that we're just coming off the heels of. You know, if we had this like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we wouldn't have been able to talk about this. But Georgia just elected the Reverend from Dr. Martin Luther King's church 50 years after Dr. King died. And so I just wanted to know your reaction. I mean, this victory was in no small part due to voter registration, which you worked really hard on. And so I just wanted to hear your reaction and how far we've come.
Well, not only for Reverend Warnock, I was very, very happy for Mr. Ossoff as well. I feel there are things along this journey that you feel exonerated about. There are things along this journey that you still feel sad about. But the election of those two gentlemen, the first African American and the first Jewish American to be elected to those positions, it elevated my pride. And it said to me, you were on the right path 57 years ago. Those of us who were working hard, Mrs. Jewel Williams, Frank's mother, we were on the right path then. We were on the right side of history. They will be known for being on not only the first, but on the right side of history. And so I feel exonerated that in spite of all of the ugliness, in spite of all of the tactics that were perpetrated against them to make them lose that election, that they won. And that's what it's going to take. Yes, they flipped Georgia blue, and that's great. But it's even more so than that. Even the history that's behind Ebenezer Baptist Church. Dr. King stopped pastoring that church when he was in his late teens, because he finished Morehouse at 19. I know y'all know that. How many of you knew that Dr. King's mother was killed in that church? Raise your hand. How many of you knew that? Nobody knew that? Oh, it's okay, it's okay. And this is not I'm a professor. This is not a trick question. Let me tell you, Dr. King's father pastored Ebenezer for many years. And just as we saw 2 or 3 years ago, a deranged young man came into the church in Carolina and killed 9 people in a prayer meeting. You remember that, right? Remember that. Not long after Dr. King was assassinated, a young white man came into church. Mrs. King was playing the organ, and he walked up to her, sitting at the organ, and blew her brains out in church. So not only did Daddy King lose both of his sons, Dr. King was assassinated, his son A.D. drowned, and he's watching his wife being shot to death, sitting on the organ playing for the service. He had to live through all of that. So historically, Ebenezer Baptist Church has a lot of good memories, and it has some sad memories, as any struggle does. But to see them elected and on their way to hopefully being agents of change makes me feel very good.
Annalyn?
Yeah, hi. So you're talking about the partnership between John Ossoff and Reverend Warnock. Got me thinking about like white allyship and like how can white people be using their privilege to like help the African American community, and like some of the best examples of white allyship you've seen in all of your experience.
Okay, let me take you back to 1963, when the civil rights workers, when young people all over the country came to Western University in Oxford, Ohio, which later became Miami, where I worked. They came to Ohio to be trained to come to Mississippi. 99% of them were white. They came to Mississippi to help Mississippians in the struggle. They came because it was right. Many of them understood that they may not make it home to their parents. Their parents understood that they may not make it home. And while they were in training, they learned that the 3 civil rights workers were missing. Well, we knew they were dead because we knew the state, the climate of Mississippi at that time, which reminds me now of Washington, D.C. less than a week ago. So we knew they were dead. And so when those young people who were in training were told, three of the workers, well, James Reed was already, the young man was already from Mississippi, but Michael Schroeder and Andrew Goodman were the 2 from out of state who had come to be trained to come to Mississippi on self-defense techniques. When they were told in that class that we have the 3 civil rights workers missing, do y'all want to go back home? Those young people said, no, we are going to Mississippi. And no matter what happens, if we die in Mississippi, we die in Mississippi. We will not stop what we're doing because it's right. So I say to you, young people, white people, multicultural, multiracial, I say to you, you have to be engaged and involved in whatever initiative you are involved in for the betterment of mankind because it's right. That's what has kept me. There are times that I probably may have thought about stopping, but I really didn't because I knew that what I was doing was right. I don't need the glory. I have probably 400, 500, 600 awards. I don't need any of that. It wasn't for any of that. It was for the fact that I made a vow in 1966 that when I had the opportunity to share these stories, that I would share them, no matter the cost. And I was prepared to die, even though I didn't want to die. The day that the Klan shot at me and ran me off the road, bumped my car down in a gully, and I was able to gain control. I said, well, if this is where I gotta die, this is where I gotta die. But I gotta die for something because you don't live for anything, and you die for anything. You got to live for something that's close to your heart because you know it's right.
Thank you so much.
I've got a question in the chat from Sean Dubois.
Okay.
He says, as someone who talked with, traveled with, and worked with Dr. King, how far are we from truly achieving his dream?
Well, I'm the first one to say, and I said this in my op-ed this morning, I'm the first one to say that we as a people, we as a nation, have made a lot of strides. As an example, Mississippi has more African-American elected officials than any other state in the country because we had to face racism head on. I do believe, however, that Dr. King would be very sad to see some of the things that has been happening over the last years, particularly when he's been gone. But young people, let me tell y'all something. I know y'all is not a good word, but you all. In my op-ed, I wrote, how did we get here? And I answered, and I raised another question. When were we never here? When were we never here? That's why our struggle is so different and unique from anybody else's. I had a grandson shot 15 times by the police, sitting in a wheelchair, couldn't walk because he was accused of stealing something out of a grocery store. Never left his home, in a wheelchair with a pin in his leg because he couldn't walk. I had 2 first cousins the same year that Emmett Till was killed that were dragged to death by the Klan, hooked to a truck. My dad's baby brother was strapped to a tree and beaten to death in front of his mother and father, which were my grandparents. So we had to endure a lot. And if anybody has a reason to be a mad Black woman, it's me. But I refuse to be because I know I can't tell the story if I'm mad. I refuse to take on anger because anger will defeat you. Anger will kill you. Hurt, yes. When I learned that my 18-year-old grandson had been killed, sitting in a wheelchair and laid in his yard 4 hours before they came to pick him up, and I had to go I flew to California with my son who just died and had to identify him, shot 15 times, shot his little finger off. Yes, I could have come back mad as any woman could be. But I had to understand that we didn't come here in ships, chained like dogs, like animals. We didn't come here with privilege. We were not even considered a whole human being. We were considered 1/5 or 2/5 or something of a human being. And so when you look at, go back and read the history.
That's how
I
much
understand why we know something.
So Papa got to get some more books like that.
Yeah, I want to say, Michael, Sam, that we have 5 minutes.
Okay.
We have 5 minutes, and I promised Dr. Wright that we would honor that time. So 5 minutes, and then we're going to transition to close.
Perfect. So we got time for about 2 questions. I think Raj and then Connie. We'll wrap it up.
If someone else wants to speak, since I already have, feel free to. I don't want to take up any extra time. If not, could I ask my question if that's all right?
Go for it, yeah.
All right. So if you can change one thing about the mindsets of those who stand neutral or against the concept of inclusivity or Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, what would it be?
Well, I just want everybody to know that we really are all equal. That the fact that we may not have had the kind of opportunities that white privileged people have had, that I'm just as much of a woman. My dad was much of a man, even though he was called boy many times, that he was as much of a man, I'm as much of a woman as anybody else. And I am entitled to the same protection and rights that other people are.
Thank you, Dr. Wright.
Connie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Hi, I'm Connie from the Westchester NAACP, and I would like to know how you felt about last Wednesday's events that happened to the Capitol.
It made my heart cry. It made my heart cry that in the op-ed I talked about, in 2021, in America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, that people could invade the sacred floors of where the people's business is being done, to say, hang Mike Pence, where's Pelosi? It took me back. I mean, I really had to do an attitude adjustment to even talk to y'all tonight. I had to really do a big attitude adjustment so that hurt would not translate into anger. I am so disappointed. But then an atmosphere has been created by number 45 where these things can happen. It has never been right, but it's been better. You may not make it right, but you can make it better. You gotta make it better because you don't want your children. See, one day you'll become me. You become 55, 6, or 7, and you don't want to have your children and grandchildren ask you, what did you do, Pop? What did you do, Mommy? And you can say, well, you know what? What did you do? Bottom line. And so if you're not willing to make the sacrifice to make things better, then they won't be better. So I want to encourage you, implore you to say, whenever you see things that you can address, you can't make everything right overnight. It didn't happen overnight. This is hundreds of years of a journey. But you take your journey, you be committed to your journey, and you can make things better.
We want to
your journey.
We want to thank Dr. Wright. Why don't you all just give her a hand or a clap or something. We want to celebrate her life, her legacy. And as she has said, you got to read the book. We have copies of the book. You can see me, and we'll make sure that what we have, we want to make sure that our young people, the books are for our young people, because we want our young people to read this history. I'm going to thank Dr. Wright, and I'll be calling her. I'm going to let you rest tonight. I'll call you tomorrow, Dr. Wright. But I want our 3 leaders to close us out, to just say some closing words, and then we'll celebrate this evening, and we'll continue trying to work towards achieving Dr. King's dream. So Michael, Sam, Theta, you guys close us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Wright. Hearing your story is definitely some great motivation for us to keep fighting and to keep going forward in this journey. To all the youth on the call, I know some of you are already part of Keepers of the Dream, but if you enjoyed tonight, we're going to be talking about it next Wednesday. And we talk about different issues almost every meeting. So if you're interested in getting involved in the group, shoot me an email. You guys all have my information from getting the Zoom link. So we'd love to have you part of this to keep this conversation going and to keep the progress going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Your words were so inspirational. Also, as a person of color, it means so much to me. Just your words of wisdom and just looking back at everything that's happened these past few weeks, these past few years, looking back at all the discouraging events, your words have really given me hope that maybe our generation can actually do what we have to do. And like you said, we all have an assignment, and hopefully we will act on that. So thank you so much.
Really inspirational. We read about the experiences that you've gone through in your life in our textbooks, but nothing compares to the firsthand account of someone who was there and lived it and was also able to see the immense progress that we've made. And so I'm just really appreciative and thankful for this opportunity to hear from you. And I think that your message that everyone has a duty, everyone has a responsibility, every generation is going to stick with a lot of people today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Give everyone a nice last round of applause. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I hope I have an opportunity at some point in time to just chat with you again.
Thank you so much.
Right. God bless. Thank you all for being a part of this.
See everyone.
God bless you as well. God bless you as well.